everybody, welcome back to Survival Prepping for Normal People. Whacked Out Wednesday on a Thursday. Pretty whacked out. Actually, after I did that post for Battleground Part 2, let my son play with my phone and he dropped it in the water yesterday. So it's been about 24 hours inside a bag of rice. As a person who prepares for unforeseen circumstances, I have a lot of rice around. So just one more reason to buy rice. Anyway, the subject of this Whacked Out Wednesday video, well, I'll let you decide what it's called. I'll just go ahead and give you the evidence at hand and a few examples of how it works. Have you ever heard of a group called the World Economic Forum? It was established in 1971 as other than governmental organization. I think that's what the Swiss call these people who meet in their country every year. You can consider them equivalent to what the Bilderberg Group is to political policy. The World Economic Forum is to economic policy. Now, it wouldn't be so disturbing that a bunch of people who care about economics and want to steer international economics in a certain direction to benefit them, and hopefully along with them other people who may work for them or are employed by them or are consumers of them. That probably wouldn't be such a big deal if they acted like your local chamber of commerce where they promoted business. The problem with the World Economic Forum is they have a tendency to promote business over everything else and let the chips fall where they may. Now, these people meet in Davos every year. I think it's at the end of January, much like the Bilderberg Group, and these people cross-pollinate all the time. A lot of the people that you would find at this World Economic Forum meeting, you would find at the Bilderberg meeting. Okay, so they're all basically the same players because they all have the same idea in mind. Now, the World Economic Forum signed a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations. And what was this memorandum of understanding about? Well, the United Nations is very concerned about sustainability. What is global sustainability? Well, in 1973, a group of people, a think tank, commissioned some people at MIT to create a computer program that would model sustainability of the human race at current rates of population increase and consumption. Do you know what the model predicted? It predicted that by the year 2020, there would be a serious downturn in the average lifestyle that the average human could expect worldwide based on population increase, food shortages, economic difficulties, warfare, and things of this nature. Now, if you know anything about Henry Kissinger, he's the kind of guy that would go to meetings of the World Economic Forum. He's the kind of guy that would go to Bilderberg meetings, Secretary of State under various presidents and other things. Very influential political figure, never elected, always appointed. He had a great many interesting things to say throughout his career. One of them was, well, basically, if you control the food, you control the people. It was shortly thereafter that many large biotech and agricultural product companies began to manipulate, genetically modify, and hybridize different varieties and strains of food, and then they patented them. If you have a patented strain or variety of anything, you control it. You patented it. Did anybody at that time understand the significance of having a patented variety of corn or wheat or tomatoes or potatoes? You see, before that, horticulturalists would develop new strains naturally by cross-pollination and other things. And if they were successful, people used them. It was as simple as that. There was no barcode on the back of the food, if you will. Well, if large corporations control the food supply, then Mr. Kissinger was right. Well, this memorandum of understanding signed by the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, in a nutshell, basically said that to make sure that humanity can go into a sustainable, equitable, and manageable future, then nation states, non-governmental organizations, and other entities should join, should partner with, should work closely with corporations. Because you see, corporations can do things that governments can't, especially here in the United States. I don't know, people like Google come to mind. They can silence people, marginalize people, influence people in ways that the government is legally restricted from doing. Now, I've talked about the Smith-Mundt Act before. I did a video on YouTube called Propaganda, Can You Spot It? Because you see, in 2012, under the National Defense Authorization Act, the Smith-Mundt Act was basically neutered. And in a nutshell, it prohibited our government here in the United States from propagandizing people here at home. But if you know anything about Operation Mockingbird, where a CIA agent was basically in every major newsroom in the country since the 1950s, kind of keeping an eye on things, if you will, kind of like a commissar, a former Soviet Union political officer who made sure that everybody was participating in right-think, that they were saying the right things and doing the right things. Now, everybody kind of knew what was approved and what wasn't. So they didn't have to actually specifically write the news stories for these outlets. You got this guy standing there from the Goon Squad, and he's watching everything you do to make sure you're playing ball. Well, something happened, and the internet came along. And the internet was a double-edged sword for them. It had very, very many great uses for the powers that be. They could monitor people's habits. It was an instant demographic check anytime you wanted to. What's trending? What's happening? What are people caring about? It was also a great tool to influence what was trending, what was happening, and what people cared about, and what they saw, and shaping their opinion. And through opinion, you shape their thoughts. And through their thoughts, you shape their actions. And through shaping their actions, you control people. Well, the World Economic Forum and the United Nations signed a memorandum of understanding that corporations and governments would work much more closely together, basically partner up and intertwine. And when corporations and governments team up to control the people, what is that called? There's a word for that. I can't remember. I know one of you guys knows that I'm having a brain fade right now. It's pretty early in the morning. Since I wasn't able to get this video out yesterday, I want to make sure I got it out today. What is that called when corporations and governments are so blurred together and blended up together for the same outcome, working toward the same goals, that you can't tell where one stops and the other begins? What is that called when governments and corporations team up to control people? There's a word for it. It's called fascism. That is the textbook definition of fascism. Now, some people say, well, fascism is where the governments take over the corporations. What's the difference if the corporations take over the government? It's the same coin, two different sides. Either way it lands, heads or tails, we lose. So expect a lot more stuff like Google has been doing, a privately held, privately run corporation that does lots of things that just happen to benefit the government, and the government just happens to look the other way when people call these corporations out on their less than ethical practices. Back to the internet. The internet is a great tool in lots of ways. And great tools usually make pretty good weapons. Hammer is a tool. Do you think the first hammer was invented to bash in somebody's skull or to drive a stake in the ground? probably didn't take too long for somebody to figure out it was good for both. Anyway, the internet allowed people to go out and look for information. They had access to more information than they ever had before, at any time in human history. One little old regular person somewhere sitting at a computer could pretty much look up whatever they wanted. And with all that information out there, they had to kind of filter it and pick and choose what they wanted to believe, what they wanted to think, what they wanted to tell other people. And then somebody came along and said, what if we flipped this continuum, this flow of information over, and told people what they wanted to think and what they wanted to know, and we could control it? Remember back, which campaign was it? Was it during the Dole-Clinton election, where they first set up free speech zones so that protesters at political rallies couldn't interrupt the political bigwigs while they were up on stage spewing their lies to everybody? A free speech zone. Hate crime laws, making it illegal for you to think certain things while you were doing other illegal things already. I don't like where all this is going. Not at all. It's getting pretty whacked out. So I want to thank you for being here in the tribe. I want to ask you, what have you done today to get ready?